Loving the days gone by Chapter 1. Chased by the spherical moon stranger. Beatrice Sama, how did you formerly lead your life? The nonchalant question hurled at her. Beatrice slowly lifted her face. This had been just about the time of awaiting supper, as she sat in front of the fire with an open book on her lap. Before her eyes, putting the hot pot on the fire, was the one spending identical time on this land, Luz. A rare half-elf, the young girl conferred with an indispensable duty in the sanctuary. Nowadays, Beatrice had been frequently acting together with her and spending time together. This being per ordinary, they had been leisurely spending time of boredom together. Beatrice, what is it that you intend, I suppose? Luz, was that a strange question on my part? Beatrice, it's not about being strange, in fact. Simply, for you to probe into Betty, just what are you plotting, I suppose? Confess with honesty, and you shall be let off without facing much, in fact. Luz, for me to be plotting something, that is out of the question. Holding the spoon for stirring the hot pot close to her chest, with long pink-hued hair, Luz acted ashamed. A young girl unsuited to secrets. She was docile when facing Beatrice as well, and the latter wanted to trust her when she said she was not plotting anything, but she shan't let her guard down. Beatrice, at any rate, Roswell would stoop to any level if it is for teasing Betty, I suppose. Luz, so you were concerned about that. Beatrice, that reaction, your face says you happen to know something, in fact. She pointed a finger at Luz, who seemed to consent, displaying a bitter smile. Afterwards, Luz said, it's a misunderstanding, and put the spoon back into the hot pot. Luz, just now, I simply thought that I certainly agree with Beatrice Sama's thoughts, because it seems Roswell Sama finds Beatrice Sama to be so cute that he just cannot help it. Beatrice, what a mistaken idea, I suppose. You are also blind to an astounding degree, in fact. He is just nasty, that is all, I suppose. Luz, is that so? I believe Roswell Sama thinks of Beatrice Sama as his younger sister. Beatrice, don't say anything so repulsive, in fact. The book interposed in her lap. Beatrice grasped her slim shoulders as she felt shivers run through her body. Luz's poor vision was also grievous. For her to say Beatrice and Roswell were siblings. Beatrice, to begin with, Betty does have a more proper sibling, Bubby, I suppose. If Bubby were also to be considered in furriness and cuteness, something like Roswell wouldn't even stand a chance, in fact. Luz, Bubby, elder brother, you mean? Beatrice Sama's, in other words, Echidna Sama's? Beatrice, things are a little bit complicated when it comes to that detail, I suppose. Luz's question, as she rounded her eyes, likely alluded to whether Beatrice's elder brother was also Echidna's child, in other words, if they were true siblings. In that sense, realizing a sibling relationship with a spirit's disposition was difficult. However, in the sense of being born through the same technique and to the same parent, Beatrice indeed had an elder brother. Beatrice, that is Betty's precious Bubby, I suppose. Luz, what kind of a person is he? Please tell me as well. Beatrice, MGH. Her eyes twinkling, keenly interested, Luz implored Beatrice. This gaze of Luz was Beatrice's weakness. Above all, Beatrice being weak to gazes of this kind was not limited to Luz alone. Beatrice, geez, what a hopeless girl, I suppose. Such insolence, in fact. Luz, well then. Beatrice, before that, be careful of the hot pot's flame, I suppose. If you become engrossed in listening and burn the supper, then it will be a problem to Mother, in fact. The dinner Luz was preparing was to be given out to people involved with the sanctuary as a feast. Luz's cooking was actually the most delicious in this settlement. Everyone has their specialties. Though spirits were not required to eat meals, they could comprehend taste and could also reduce mana into food. In secret, Beatrice had also been looking forward to the supper Luz would make. Beatrice, so don't burn it, I suppose. Luz, I understand. Well then, what story are you going to let me hear? Beatrice, how self-serving, in fact. If that's the case, then Betty will tell you about a while back, I suppose. A tale coming from the topic of her elder brother. If so, Beatrice shall talk about the days she spent with her elder brother, back when the sanctuary had not been created yet, and she had not even met Roswell, the time Beatrice had lived through, having been born as the daughter of the witch, alongside her solitary elder brother. and the reason why Beatrice became such that she would look forward to suppers like humans. A short glance at Luz, whose eyes were twinkling and cheeks dyed red in anticipation, and Beatrice sighed. Beatrice. That was back when Betty had been entrusted with the house during Mother's absence, in fact. Stranger, Ayo. She raised her voice and crouched down upon the impact that landed on the top of her head. What had directly hit the area of the whorls of hair on the rear of her head was a single book that fell as she was pulling it out. The indolence behind her claim of being able to obtain it from the upper row of the bookshelf, without a stepladder, gave rise to calamity. And as she stood on her tiptoes, stretching for above, she ultimately had to catch the book which slipped through her fingers with her head. Stranger. What a disaster, I suppose. How audacious for a mere book, in fact. The book was quite a large one by itself. Its impact had been nothing short of hefty. But to admit that would mark the further increase of her own miserableness, the girl sourly refused to admit defeat before the book lying on the floor. Above all, the faint tears accumulated in those large eyes of hers lost her of any convincibility. She was a young girl in possession of characteristic eyes of a bluish tint and symbolic patterns resembling butterflies visible on them. Big, round eyes along with prickly, unruffled, well-ordered facial features. Possessing a face and figure of approximately 10 years of age, the young child who gave the impression that she shall become a charming beauty in the future was garbed in an extravagant dress. Her pale-hued hair carefully rolled, the girl's figure was as though a princess from a picture book. Stranger. Geez, you may be a book, but you lack the self-awareness of being Mother's property, I suppose. That is why you brought this chaos upon Betty, in fact. The sweet, albeit young girl picked the fallen book up and cleared away the dust on its binding, whilst making excuses that went unheard by anyone. The book was one with black binding, with no title on its cover. Its contents were unknown at a glance, but when the young girl put her fingers, which she had cleared the dust on the cover away with, and contemplated, a faint light gave rise to letters. It was the book's title. Simply Mana I was written on it. Stranger. Letters written with dregs of mana, though it is for the purpose of not being able to be read by those who do not have aptitude for mana. Mother's watchfulness is per expectation, I suppose. Murmuring thoughts bristling with reverence, the girl opened the bulky book. Though within it were nothing but blank pages, letters appeared on them upon contemplation, identical to how they had on the cover. Magical books that could only be read by those who could utilize mana were plentifully lined up in the shelf before her eyes. No, in the infinite number of bookshelves that comprised the young girl's environs. A library packed with magical books of such nature. To those with no groundings, they were worthless blank books. Contrariwise, it was a mountain of treasure possessing inestimable worth for those qualified. The young girl harbored pride in having been given the right to freely enter and exit this library. Just how many humans across the world would thirst for the key to this treasury of knowledge? A sense of supremacy for having been bestowed with what could not be gained with ease, even upon wishing for it. However, it was simply natural she would be the object to this favorable treatment. For the young girl was, stranger, the one and only daughter of the Great Mother, in fact. Stranger. Oh, in the midst of studying, are you Betty? Stranger. As she puffed up her chest out of slight self-regard, the young girl's shoulders sprung in astonishment upon hearing the voice. The book dropped from her hands once again, this time striking her tiptoes. Shouting Ukya, the young girl reflexively crouched on the spot. Stranger. Ah, Betty, I'm sorry, all because I called out to you out of nowhere. Stranger. It doesn't hurt, I suppose, hic. Stranger. You sure are a strong girl. Now show me your foot. Tightly gnashing her molars, the young girl braved the pain. What gently descended whilst fluttering right before her eyes was a kitten of gray-colored fur levitating in the air. The kitten lengthened its tail that was around the same length as its body and softly pointed its end towards the young girl's hurting tiptoes. And a pale light was emitted. Its warmth gradually healed her pain. Stranger. No pain go away. Why did it go away? Stranger. It's gone away, in fact. Thank you, I suppose. Stranger. All 'cause I surprised you, after all. Doing this much is a matter of course. The kitten accepted her gratitude with an affluent smile whilst putting a hand on its waist. Holding the fallen book in her arms once again, the girl stood up and looked into the eyes of the kitten. Of a size enough to sit on a palm and capable of comprehending human speech was the kitten. It was not precisely a kitten. To the utmost, its shape and form merely resembled a lovable cat. Its true state was that of a further exalted being. A spirit living by using mana, the primal power swaying across this world. As a source of energy was what the kitten was. But for the young girl, there existed a further appropriate name for it. Stranger. For pity's sake, Bubby sure is an oversleeper, in fact. It's already past noon, I suppose. Stranger, sorry, I accidentally got too much at ease. See, I resemble a cat, right? So I fail to resist the instinct of wanting to laze around when I find a nice, sunny spot. The girl referred to the mischievously grinning kitten as Bubby, big brother. An outsider may observe the kitten and the girl refer to each other in an odd fashion, but there was nothing uncanny about it. The young girl and the kitten were a recherche set of siblings born in the same manner, for they were fellow artificial spirits, beings of paramount eternity albeit born from human hands. The girl's name was Beatrice, the kitten's name was Puck. This was the identity of the siblings, who directed deep affection mutually toward each other despite completely unalike shape and form. Puck, I must say, Betty sure has a zeal for studying. Reading in the library again, are you? Glancing at the book Beatrice was carrying by her chest, Puck tilted his neck whilst gently brushing his whiskers. Subject to his gaze, Beatrice nodded in assent with a yes, in fact, Beatrice. In order to gain knowledge befitting of what mother's daughter should suitably have, Betty is diligently devoting herself to studies. Puck, whoa, very fine. But is it really needed? Though both Betty and I are spirits born with a bunch of procedures omitted, Mana's usage is something instinctive, right? Articulating, Puck raised both of his tiny hands and ahead of his physical body generated a red and a blue light. Each of the lights were conceived with fire and water mana respectively, but for Puck, who happened to be a great spirit, this was as natural an ability as swaying his tail. Of course, Beatrice was capable of the same as well. Though she was capable, Beatrice. Doing it per sensation and augmenting it with proper knowledge is different, in fact, Bubby. You and Betty are capable of it, but that alone won't suffice, I suppose. Puck. Well, you sure are a stern one, Betty. But why? Beatrice. Betty being mother's daughter and presently acting as proxy for the proprietor of this palace of knowledge are also factors that play into it, in fact. Stretching her dorsal muscles firmly, Beatrice inlaid strength into her chest with which she was carrying the book. A mountain of books submerged in countless bookshelves, contained therein a vast expanse of knowledge yearning to yet unable to change the world. Suitable of being named as proscribed knowledge forbidden from being hauled outside by anyone. The true proprietor of this palace, Beatrice's mother, was even capable of memorizing it all. However, Beatrice did not possess that extent of ability yet. But now that she had been entrusted in place of her mother, she must compensate with everything within the grasp of her effort. Beatrice, for that Betty is studying every day, I suppose. Puck, how praiseworthy, though it must be tough. I mean, the title of that book is also Mana I, right? The other book is also. Articulating so, Puck pulled out a random book out of the bookshelf. With Mana concentrating on it, appeared on its front cover the title Earth IV, truly simple and concise. The book likely had information about Earth written within, and had no further information included. That was a problem not present in this book alone, but shared amongst almost all of the magical books submerging the bookshelves. Puck. It's her bad habit. From the onset, she must be thinking only about reading and writing it herself, hence that it'd be fine as long as she alone understands it. The way the books have been arranged is a total mess as well. Beatrice. Mother has her profound intents, in fact, Bubby. It'd be impolite to speak that way, I suppose. Even if it's Bubby, Betty will get furious, in fact. Puck, you definitely are praiseworthy. Puck crossed his short arms watching Beatrice pout. Her cheek pressed by his long tail, Beatrice lowered her eyebrows as her pouting cheeks deflated. Whatever she may have told Puck, Beatrice was greatly perplexed by the abstruse nature of the reading material as well. Just as Puck had remarked, The proprietor of this palace was the proprietor of genius beyond the attainability of human intellect, and was moving per a peculiar principle that could never be comprehended by others. The book's arrangement was in identical state, making even Beatrice face hardship in finding the book of her choice. Truth be told, Manai, which she was holding at present, was not the book of her desire either, though it seemed interesting by itself, and she wished to memorize its content via sedulous reading. Puck. Some books have the same title at times. The numbering is all slipshod too, yeah. There's also the writing of memos on the back, procrastinating summarizing them all together, keeping organizing them for another day. Beatrice. Betty wants to hurry up and become such that she can apprehend Mother's ideas as well, I suppose. Puck. I just think it's simply sloppy. Beatrice. Bubby. As Beatrice pouted her lips, the kitten spoke, got it, and proceeded to levitate further upward. Then suddenly, Puck said, "What's this?" as his black eyes darted towards the room's window. Puck, Betty, seems like a visitor is here. Pretty brave of him to make his way to this mansion. Beatrice. Oh no, in fact, must prepare for the reception, I suppose. Jumping next to Puck as he gazed outside, she affirmed movement of the main gate of Beatrice's palace. The shadow, passing through the main gate whilst bewildered, was one with the qualification, having surmounted the multiple barriers for reaching this palace. At present, during her mother's absence, it was Beatrice's duty to welcome them. Beatrice. Bubby. Betty is going to go, in fact. The conversation resumes sometime later, I suppose. Puck. Whoopsie. Cramming the book she was holding into a bookshelf within her reach, Beatrice's dress fluttered as she broke into a sprint. Giving a send-off to the acutely panicking back, Puck proceeded to caress his whiskers. Puck. It sure feels like she takes right after her mother when it comes to this casually unorganized nature. Having rushed out of the library, leaving these impressions of Puck's behind, Beatrice headed towards the entry hall. Subsequently reaching the position immediately before, she adjusted her dress and hair, perfecting her personal appearance. Beatrice. Well then, about time, this is Betty's duty, I suppose, she told herself before stretching her hand ahead. Receiving her actions, the palace's entrance. The dual grand doors automatically opened gradually. Cold wind conceived with the aroma of a clear sky wafted in. Accompanying the wind and sun rays descending from zenith, the red-haired youth peeked into the palace through his astonishment. Seeing his pupils frozen over in awe and nervousness, Beatrice contently straightened her eyes. Beatrice. Commendation for making thy way here. In mother's stead, thy visit shall be welcomed, hero, I suppose. Focusing on the opponent owning an astonished expression, with ample dignity, at the very least, seeking to appear with ample dignity by her perspective, Beatrice declared calmly. The hero who had paid a call to the palace of the witch was far too exceedingly thrilled by this reception to even swallow his breath. In this world existed beings having conceived special strength, regardless congenital or acquired. All of them manifested odd talents improbable of being recreated by ordinary individuals, superhumans who interfered with the principles of this world. Even amongst them, the existences who possessed might that projected the brinks of humankind, isolated superior beings that let none other come close. People called those as the witches. Absolute personages who overcame the reason and principles of the human world, unbound by common sense, making no considerations for others. Hence, all feared, dreaded, shunned the witches. That was the ordinary state of affairs, and the common cognizance pertaining to the absolute beings named as the witches. Beatrice, however, mother is the solitary exception to that, in fact. Taking pride as though a matter of her own, Beatrice put her hand on her puffed, slim chest. Beatrice, mother possesses a profoundly compassionate, magnanimous, and honorable heart, I suppose. Hence, whilst wielding the most excelling power in this world, she is not troubled by actuating it for the benefit of others, in fact. You all are also to firmly engrave that in your minds, I suppose. Stranger. Beatrice. Engrave that in your mind, in fact. Stranger. You understood. I'll engrave it in my mind. I'll engrave it in my mind. The deferential youth's shoulders bounced upon her pressurizing gaze. His grateful conduct made Beatrice nod, satisfied. This place was the palace's parlor, where visitors received at the entry hall were shown around and made to have a seat. Above all, the conduct of the visitor seated on the sofa lacked all composure. That was per natural. Remaining calm when taken into the palace of the witch would be the abnormality. Seeing fright toward that witch personified was pleasant to Beatrice. Beatrice. It is correct to regard the name of the Great Mother as exalted and noble, I suppose. Stranger. That is a matter of course. After all, the Witch of Wisdom Sama's name is renowned. Beatrice. Yes, in fact. You certainly get it, I suppose. Will compliment you for that, in fact. Hearing greater admiration for her mother, Beatrice caressed the person's head as her mood progressively became genial. The youth rounded his eyes upon her actions as she peered into his blue eyes. Beatrice. So, having reached the Great Mother's, the Witch of Wisdom's palace, what is that you want to ask, I suppose? What compelled you to approach the barriers of the witch, in fact? Stranger. Barrier, you say, that's... Beatrice. An exaggeration, you mean to say. To make it clear, this is no place one can just easily come to when he wants, I suppose. A mighty wish that would seemingly scorch your heart, that is what made you reach here, in fact. Speaking so, Beatrice pointed towards the exterior of the window, the vast, extensive, entirely uninterrupted landscape. Though this was a remote location distant from human habitation, it was not merely some random remote location. The summit of a tall, lofty mountain that verbatim pierced above the clouds. The ground underneath, impossible to be viewed due to the obstruction of the thick clouds, was populated by a dense, vast forest and rich mana that could not be compared with any other land made nature grow to abnormal degrees. This derailed sense of direction, the forest at times freely altered its shape and form, a naturally strategic position which humans were not allowed to enter with ease. Ahead of this rigorous environment lay this palace of the witch, a resilient body that could travel by foot through the extensive, mighty forest, judgment that could overcome all kinds of obstacles interwoven by nature, a heart that would not get exhausted midway through the course, and the serendipity of time. With a concurrence of all of these, the qualification to finally reach this palace could be said to have been acquired. Beatrice. However, though it is important to have the mind and body remain strong at once, there is something more important than that, I suppose. Stranger. That being the wish, Beatrice. In fact, you must also have an idea, I suppose, regarding the wish that made you keep advancing, in fact. If a powerful flesh body and sharp determination were the requirements for tackling this forest, then a mighty wish that would seemingly scorch one's body was precisely the condition for reaching this witch's palace. Both of these prerequisites had been satisfied. The youth, gaze cast downward and searching for words, was only about 15 to 16 years old, age that indubitably constituted him as a young boy. On top of that, rough clothes with a satchel of fur, his old-fashioned tawdry sword and equipment were also meager. It could be told from his responses alone that he was abound in knowledge unsuitable for his age, and also possible to sense he was endowed with odd talents and ability rivaling the aforementioned witches. For him to have reached the palace of the witch meant, Beatrice. It means that you do have a wish unbefitting your stature, I suppose. Mother welcomes those relying on the witch for fulfilling such wishes unsuited to their vessel, in fact. Stranger. But I have nothing that could be an offering. Beatrice. Do not belittle, I suppose. To begin with, mother's deeds are not so cheap that they could be recompensed by you all, in fact. Stranger. If that's the case, then that's all the more reason not to. The youth's face reddened upon slight provocation. Beatrice narrowed her eyes upon the befitting immaturity of the youth and took a short inhale. Mocking banal humans, this way was fine. But it was about time she fulfilled her original duty. Acting as proxy for the proprietor of the palace, that being, extending a hand of salvation to those who had stepped foot here in pursuit of wisdom. Beatrice. That is mother's, the witch echidna's compassion, I suppose. Stranger. Beatrice. You shall be asked again, in fact. What is your wish? What do you desire to know? How will you respond, I suppose? There is nothing which mother does not know until the very edge of the edge of the edge of this world, in fact. Spreading her arms wide, declared Beatrice, as if singing. The youth unwittingly straightened his spine upon hearing her, and similarly Beatrice encouraged herself to an identical degree. Her mother presently absent, Beatrice stood as her proxy. Thus it was only natural that her conduct be similar to that of her mother as well. No failure, error, blunder should happen. For certain. The youth's lips quivered a few times before Beatrice, who had abandoned her own nature. Before long he solidified his cheeks as though having cemented his thoughts, and spoke. Stranger. Please teach me, a way my childhood friend won't be taken away. Beatrice. Huh? Yes, Beatrice was taken aback, dumbfounded, as the youth declared with an expression exhibiting preparedness for death. Viewing Beatrice's expression, the youth pitched forward pronouncing, like I say, stranger, I want you to teach me, a way that my childhood friend won't get snatched away. Beatrice. Wait a second, I suppose. Betty may have misheard, in fact. You just said, a way your childhood friend won't get snatched away, stranger. Yes, I want to protect my childhood friend, Remina. The youth leaned forward, moreover, with an intimidating attitude before Beatrice started feeling dizzy. To rescue lands with crops failed due to droughts, to aid villages fallen into the predicament of frequent floods, to decontaminate grounds that stopped being approached by people due to dense mana storms. For solving such circumstances beyond human intellect the witch had been relied on. To think the youth would use this opportunity for his childhood friend, an apparent subject of his affection, to not be snatched away. Beatrice. This is Betty's first task as mother's proxy, stranger. So on that note, where might the pivotal witch Sama be? The youth timidly asked before Beatrice awakened from her dizziness due to the unforeseen circumstance. However, with a wait, I suppose Beatrice pointed her hand towards the youth. Beatrice. Mother is currently absent. Thus, Betty will entertain you and grant the wisdom corresponding to your wish, stranger. What might have happened, Beatrice. Betty didn't exactly devotedly read through Mother's vast collection of books, for the sake of some human's love affair, I suppose. Knelt down, Beatrice cursed the misfortune befallen upon herself. However, Beatrice was representing her mother. The youth before her eyes had stepped foot into this place, having overcome the necessary trials. Hence, Beatrice must answer, even if this was some boundlessly worthless matter of some human's love affair, stranger. Now, Betty, you mustn't jump to conclusions. It is an important matter for this child, and you must properly listen to what more he has to say, you know. Beatrice. Beatrice subsequently lifted her face at the voice descending from overhead, whilst she mourned for her own self. Present there was Puck, his tail in his arms, softly sprawling in the air, levitating close to the ceiling of the parlor. This entrance of Puck's made the youth holler, "Eh," as he darted his eyes around. Stranger. A sea cat? No, could it be a spirit? Puck. Yep, I'm surprised you got it. Despite being so furry, I'm a spirit. With the permission of that mother, I'm living together with Betty. Nice to be with you, stranger. Pleased to be in your company. Puck pointed his tiny hand towards the baffled youth whilst gyrating and descending. Perplexed, the youth exchanged something akin to handshake by picking Puck's hand with a finger. Puck. I'll ask in place of the depressed Betty, but what's your name? Tosca. I'm Tosca. I came from a village called Karnatsi. Puck. I see. I'll say this, you sure are a hard worker, Tosca. Betty also spoke of the same, but this palace really is no place you can easily reach. It takes many days if you travel by foot, yeah? Tosca. I was anyhow just desperate. Puck. Seems so. Remina-chan, was it? Is she someone precious to you? Puck's inquiry made the youth, Tosca, falter a bit, but he then proceeded to give a deep nod. Tosca. Yes, Remina is my childhood friend, but that's not all. Puck. Is that so? If that's the case, then I'm rooting for you. I'm an ally to maidens in love and youthful youngsters, you see. So then, what kind of a guy is your romantic rival? Like the spoiled son of a distinguished figure in the village, a greedy nobleman who's the tax collector. Or if things are odd, then there's also the possibility of it being a relative. Beatrice. If a love affair is all that it is, then just run away at night or elope with her or whatever, in fact. The deeply breathing Beatrice threw water onto Puck and Tosca's heated dialogue. Though she had surmounted the initial shock, Beatrice could not digest this with ease in spite of even Puck's direction. The love affair of a man and a woman was far too lowly to borrow the knowledge of the Witch of Wisdom. Beatrice. Yet, why did he make it to the palace, I suppose? The criterion for selection is excessively enigmatic, in fact. Betty laments her insufficiency of being unable to apprehend Mother's profound intents, I suppose. Holding her head, Beatrice earnestly surmised the true motives of her currently absent mother. She must understand the intentions of her mother, voiced not in many words, lest she fail to fulfill her duty of being her proxy. Wrinkles forming by her lovable eyebrows, Beatrice groaned. Witnessing Beatrice's conduct, Tosca stood up, having surpassed the limit of his endurance. Tosca. There really is no time. At this rate Remina will become a sacrifice for the Blight Dragon. Beatrice. Wait again, in fact. Beatrice pointed her palm towards his muzzle as Tosca earnestly implored. The exchange made Tosca widen his eyes, vocalizing a hem, but Beatrice paid no heed. If anything, she commandingly glared at the youth taller than herself. Beatrice. Blight Dragon. Did you say Blight Dragon, I suppose? Your childhood friend was chosen as sacrifice for the Blight Dragon, in fact. Tosca. That's correct. I've been saying that the whole time, haven't I? Beatrice. You didn't say even the slightest bit of that, you enormous dunce. Tosca. O.W. Hick. His tiptoes stomped. Tosca jumped up and down with tearful eyes. However, considering how he had distressed Beatrice due to his dearth of explanation, he had earned that much. He must have also had anxiety and nervousness after having reached the palace of the witch. She had considered that, but what a truly crude elucidation it had been. However, now she had a grasp on the matter. Puck. In other words, a Blight Dragon settled close to Tosca's village, and Tosca's childhood friend. Tosca. It's Remina. Puck. Right, Remina was chosen as the sacrifice is what the situation is. So you can't run away with Remina and let the village be brought to ruin by the Blight Dragon either, and are facing immense turmoil, is what it means. Tosca powerlessly nodded as Puck encapsulated the circumstance. He hesitantly commenced reciting the situation surrounding himself, his childhood friend, and the village. Tosca. Karnatsi is a small village with a population of about 50 people. Most households practice farming, including mine, and I am the second son. Remina is the same age as me and she's also my neighbor. Beatrice. Get this backstory of yours out of here, in fact. Tosca. Why, yes. Anyhow, Remina says she's going to become the sacrifice for the Blight Dragon for the sake of the village and just won't listen. But even if Remina were to become the sacrifice, Puck. Once it has an empty stomach again, it'll demand the same thing. Dragons sure are classless. Hearing Puck's impression gave no rise to a smile on Tosca's face. His childhood friend who accepted the role of being the sacrifice was a valorous young girl, but Puck's say was correct. Even if the sacrifice were to be offered, only a smidgen of peace would the Blight Dragon grant. And Tosca did not want to lose his childhood friend in exchange for that smidgen of peace. Beatrice. So you came here searching for a way to kill the Blight Dragon, I suppose. Tosca. And no, I wouldn't go that far. Beatrice. Unnecessary appearances are a waste of time, in fact. Coming so far for the sake of hope, then dreading your wish at the crucial point, I suppose. That is unhinged, in fact. She affirmed precisely his wish, his desire. To frantically cling to something, to wish whilst paying no heed to appearances, meant having reached the water's edge. When there no longer existed any future, hope, potentiality, only to those who could earnestly put their life on the line did the gates of the palace of the witch open. And Beatrice was one acting as proxy for the witch who offered her hand to those drowning. Beatrice. Now, the great spirit Beatrice inquires, I suppose, what is your wish? Having arrived at the palace of the witch who grants wisdom, just what is it that you desire, in fact? Tosca. In response to Beatrice's question, Tosca's voice became huskier, tinged with heat. Nervousness parched the youth's mouth, but he prevailed over that vexing thirst. The youth bit his lips, saturating his tongue with his own blood, his blue eyes gazing at Beatrice. Tosca. I want to kill the Blight Dragon and save Remina. Beatrice. Can't hear you, I suppose. Tosca. Teach me a way to kill the Blight Dragon. Remina is someone precious to me. blood streaming from the vicinity of his mouth, Tosca powerfully beseeched with impetus as though truly vomiting blood. Listening to Tosca implore, Puck shut a single eye whilst hugging his tail. And Beatrice nodded, having heard the same implore, Beatrice. "The witch's daughter, Beatrice, shall grant that wish of yours, in fact." She answered. With a smile, she had done her best effort to learn from her mother. Puck, nevertheless, so the opponent is a blight dragon, eh? A bit weighty for Betty's first task. Their discussion straightened out. Puck gently broke the ice as he leisurely descended. Vocalizing a hug, Tosca made a startled expression at the innocuous comment. As though awakening from a fever, he compared Beatrice and Puck with the eye, Tosca. "That reminds me, I got a bit carried away, but what's this about the witch Sama being absent, or the witch's daughter, or a cat spirit Sama? Beatrice, no need to make such a ruckus, I suppose. It's just as you heard, in fact. Bubby is a spirit and Betty is Mother's daughter. And Mother, the proprietor of the palace, is absent, I suppose. Something about there being an unusual evil omen. She is currently on a trip to the eastern edge, in fact." Tosca. "She's gone out, you say, W. When will she be able to return?" Beatrice. "No specific clue, I suppose. She simply comes to observe the circumstances once a month, in fact. Generally, it's usually the night of the full moon." Tosca. "Hick, we won't make it then," Tosca hollered, countenance pale and hands on his head. Tosca. "Remina will be proffered as sacrifice on the night of the full moon. Only 10 days remain till then." Puck. Exactly the X day Echidna returns on, huh?" Tosca. "X. Anyhow, we must return to the village before that day." Tosca peered at Beatrice as though clinging onto her, his face yet pallid. His gaze was urging her to somehow get in contact with Echidna, but there existed no such means. The tool Echidna had invented, the conversing mirrors, were there, but she did not carry those with herself. According to her mother, she was not one who liked to look at her own face, Beatrice. It would be far too late should Mother's return be awaited, in fact. Even for granting a plan instead, it would be onerous to complete preparations within 10 days from now, I suppose. Puck. Even if their hands are grabbed as they drown, there's no way everybody would be saved, isn't it? Tosca. "No way." Hearing Beatrice and Puck's conversation, Tosca's head hung low, heartbroken, truly ironic. For him to have made his way to the palace of the witch seeking a hand of salvation, yet for it to remain ungranted due to the pivotal witch's absence. The outcome, he wasted the remaining few fragments of time he had with his childhood friend, and must return empty-handed, owning no other alternatives. Rather, there was no surety whether he would even be able to make it back to that village by the next night of the full moon. Beatrice. "That is unacceptable, in fact." Puck. "Betty." Puck's ears quivered at her murmur. Looking upwards at Puck, the characteristic patterns visible on Beatrice's pupils flailed. Beatrice. "Just as Bubby is aware, this is Betty's first task, I suppose. Mother entrusted Betty to attend during her absence, and commanded to fulfill the duties of the palace of the witch, in fact. Yet to abandon the first hero who called onto this place due to an absence of means, are you fine with something like that, I suppose?" Puck. Admitting not being able to do what can't be done is also a show of courage, wouldn't you say?" Beatrice. "But it is Betty's mission to be useful to Mother, in fact." Puck. "Mission." Puck grimaced at Beatrice's words as she firmly clenched her fist and touched her chest. The word mission was a heavy one for spirits, artificial spirits, Beatrice and Puck. So incredibly heavy it was beyond any possible comparison, constituting the core of their selves. Both had taken birth together, not naturally, but by the witch, and their existences held purpose. Beatrice's did, so did Puck's. That was Beatrice. As long as Betty is serving as Mother's proxy, no hand seeking salvation shall be shaken off, I suppose. Tosca. Beatrice Jan. Beatrice. Why would you suffix Chan onto Betty's name there, in fact? Tosca. That who art he hick? Tosca was moved to see Beatrice be so ardent, only for her to downright step on his feet. However, she believed this exuberance made for the undone final push. The blight dragon extermination of Karnatsi, as sought by the hero Tosca. Beatrice. Mine self Beatrice shall grant that wish in Mother's stead, I suppose. Beatrice declared sonorously whilst vigorously beating her chest. His eyes widened upon her pronouncement, Tosca inhaled with the trodden foot grasped in his hands. Tosca. I do appreciate the sentimentog. Beatrice. Got tired of listening to your unneeded objections, in fact. With the toes of his other foot stepped on, Tosca hopped on the floor with one leg at a time. For Tosca, no, for outsiders to make light of Beatrice assuming from her outward appearance was as anticipated. However, that was immense imprudence. Beatrice? Betty is mother's daughter. Being lumped together with some random lackluster spirit is intolerable, I suppose. Besides, if Betty will go, then Bubby will also come along without fail, in fact. Puck. Well, that's true. I've been told to look after Betty by Echidna anyways, and there's only so far you can actually let your cute kid travel into the world. Tosca. Puck Sama aside, Beatrice jaw. Sama is also a spirit. Tending to both of his feet whilst seated on the chair, Tosca tilted his head as he visually compared Beatrice and Puck. Tosca. I completely thought spirits were like, either softly floating around like lights, or otherwise had taken the form of animals like Puck Sama. Puck. That's correct. Though on instances there are also some who specialize in taking the forms of humans, a great deal of spirits' original forms are animalesque forms. Same goes for me, too. Beatrice. For Betty, it is simply that this is the form mother brought forth, I suppose. Of course, a spirit's might is not determined by shape and form, in fact. Even Bubby is so furry and lovable, I suppose. Puck. Tosca. Well, I don't really know about that, but... The spirit siblings held their heads high side by side, before Tosca pronounced awe and formed an expression of having noticed something. Tosca. Spirits live far longer than humans, yes. Then could it be that the same applies to the two of you? Beatrice. Oh, of course, in fact. It would be trouble should you misinterpret this brimming majesty and intellect, I suppose. Tosca. I knew it. May I ask what approximately your age is? Puck. Both Betty and I would be around 3 years old, yeah. Tosca. You're totally young, Tosca exclaimed, his anticipation proven inaccurate as Puck shrugged his shoulders. Levitating before the let-down Tosca's face, Puck pointed his tail forward and remarked, Do you hear me? Puck. Don't have any misunderstandings, okay? A cat's 3 years equate to around a human's 30 years. Tosca. But still, that's way younger than my old man, and going by that line of reason Beatrice Sama is whoops. Beatrice. MGH, don't conveniently dodge, in fact. Tosca. I absolutely will dodge. Tosca evaded Beatrice's heel, revealing his intent to not be stepped on countlessly. He then proceeded to gaze at the two, commenting, It's no good after all, Tosca. I appreciate your sentiment, but I cannot entangle children, people who are younger than me, into something so perilous. I will run back to the village, Beatrice. You do not appear to be a fellow so laudable that you would then spend the remainder of your time together, I suppose. You intend to challenge the Blight Dragon for the sake of your childhood friend, in fact. Tosca. Hick. Beatrice. What an inconceivably colossal fool, I suppose. Something like tackling a battle that cannot be won is meaningless, in fact. His eyes cast down, Tosca sunk his teeth into his lips upon Beatrice's discernment, unable to rebut. For she had hit the bull's eye. For the sake of his childhood friend, he had endangered his life to pay a call to this palace, banking his dependency onto the Witch of Wisdom. Inversely said, it implied the absence of any allies who would fight with him. Beatrice. Now that you have come here, something like that won't be allowed, I suppose. The Witch of Wisdom grants wisdom in order to elevate those seeking salvation. Then what can be accorded is not restricted to wisdom, in fact. Tosca. Ah, Beatrice, it shall be said once more. You seek a way to kill the Blight Dragon, and Betty gave her word to respond to that. Thus she shall respond. Betty will, with this life of hers at stake. For might to dwell in her words, in these moments, set ablaze was a definite flame within Beatrice's soul. And that flame transfigured into an inferno, engulfing even Tosca, gazing before her within. Scorched by the blaze, Tosca inhaled and deeply lowered his head as light sojourned within his blue eyes. Tosca. Thank you very much. Prithee, fight by my side. No disputation necessary this time, marking the beginning of her first task. Fastening the doors of the palace and arranging a parting letter for the time her mother returned during their absence. Beatrice, alongside Puck, exited the palace accompanying Tosca with all preparations completed. Beatrice. The target time is the night of the full moon 10 days from now. Betty will make sure to reach, I suppose. Tosca. To be honest, I believe we will barely make it, since the climb up to this palace was nothing short of extraordinary. Many set forth for the palace of the witch in pursuit of wisdom, but the vast majority of them were filtered out due to scanty courage and ability. The prime reason being the mountain trail leading towards the palace. So bedeviling it could no longer even be dubbed a mountain trail. Cold sweat emerged on Tosca through mere recollection. However, Beatrice. Relax, in fact. The hindering vermin up until the palace are only there when entering, they won't intrude when returning. Tosca. Really? But there's also the rumor about the forest of no returns. Puck. Those kinds of rumors have been spread because if you come to the forest with scrappy feelings and ability, then you'll only have a bad time, I think. Echidna's a girl who does those sorts of things. Tosca's cognizance seemed to be enormously jolted by the impact of the truth he had been informed about. And seeing a rise in the number of humans conversant with her mother's true form was something delightful yet slightly lonesome for Beatrice. Beatrice. Regardless, there is no apprehension for descending the mountain, in fact. Tosca. Yes. If we can just exit the mountain and the forest, then I'll run while carrying Beatrice-sama on my shoulder the rest of the way. Puck-sama will. Puck. I can keep up by flying, so it's all good. Tosca nodded as Puck responded with a relaxed pitch, waving his tail. Putting the two's discourse aside, Beatrice looked back towards the palace and gently tapered her eyes while standing before the gates. A parental home for Beatrice, for by the palace of wisdom entrusted to her by her mother, albeit momentarily, something stood out about being apart from it. Tosca. Beatrice-sama, is it truly all right to be absent from the palace? Puck. Well, only 1 or 2 people make their way to it in a year, and if they happen to reach it during the time of absence, then they're just unlucky, I suppose, so it can't be helped, I guess. This is also the first time Betty is leaving her home, so let's let her resolve her heart. Tosca. It's also the first time she's leaving the palace. Puck. Is it something to be surprised about? Puck caressed his own face with a hand before Tosca opened his eyes wide. Puck. Even animals live their entire lives within their territories if they can defend it, right? If there never rises a need to go afar, then you too would live all your life inside that tiny village of yours. It's the same thing. Tosca. If you say so, that's true, I suppose. Puck. Betty's thing is also important, but I think you'd be better off worrying for yourself. There probably won't be any time to take breaks between this place and your village, so are you fine with the way you're prepared? In accordance with Beatrice's assessment of it being meager, judging Tosca's equipment to vastly fall short of the minimum necessary standard would be correct. Despite being congruous with him being a son of a farmer, it would inescapably be termed as unsuitable for a wayfarer undertaking long travels. His garbs, his footwear, even the sword hanging on his hip, all were paltry and of poor quality. Puck, this is coming a bit too late, but I'm surprised you made your way to the palace. It can only be categorized as love and courage making up for it, isn't it? Tosca. But only as compensation also. My body's been burlier than others since long before, so that may be the reason. Puck. Burly? That's sort of a divine protection, I wonder. Well, it's gotta be at least that much or it'd be impossible. Yeah. Tosca answered whilst scratching his head as Puck made sense of it, surmising it to be something in such wise. And making end of her brief farewell to her parental home, Beatrice regrouped with the two. Beatrice. Sorry for the wait, I suppose. It's time to depart, in fact. Tosca. Understood. Beatrice-sama, your luggage. Even Tosca, who sported lightweight equipment and clothing for tackling the towering mountain, was stupefied by Beatrice's travel outfit, for nothing about it had altered since the time they had their dialogue in the parlor. Beatrice. Betty is certain to have told you, I suppose. Betty is a spirit. This outfit and even physique are molded with mana, in fact. Betty has total freedom over changing clothes and refashioning. Hand luggage is a mere hindrance, I suppose. Tosca. Then what about water or food? Puck. Unnecessary for us. We'll take 'em if you give 'em, but simply gobbling up the mana suspended in the air is sufficient. That's why I'm also empty-handed and naked. Beatrice. Bubby has natural fur, which is just the best, in fact. Beatrice light-heartedly nodded as she rubbed cheeks with Puck, who perched on her shoulder. Hearing this interchange made Tosca say, "Is that so?" in admiration, Tosca. "If that's the case, then I, a human, am looking to be the most burdensome." Beatrice. HMPH. Now that Betty has decided to follow through with it, it is her duty to pull you along, I suppose. Through the course of the journey, she will provide you with water, and even help with hunting if necessary. In fact, Puck, we can also give rise to a tailwind and level the ground to make it easier to run. More than satisfactory, wouldn't you say? Wind blew with a swing of Beatrice's hand. Ground was smoothed with a swing of Puck's tail. Beholding this with his own two eyes, Tosca cleared his throat and was yet again allured by the two's might as spirits. Furthermore, he learnt that acting with queer restraint pertaining to the two's might would be discourteous as well. Tosca, I understand. I shall borrow the power of you too. Prithee, make haste toward the itinerary to the village first. Beatrice, agreeable, I suppose. Now, well then, you'll have to carry Betty in your arms, in fact. Nodding with a yes, Tosca's hands reached for Beatrice, both her arms outstretched. And he scooped her up and coiled his arm around Beatrice's waist, carrying her by his side as though carrying firewood. Tosca, all right, Og, it hurt hick. Beatrice, don't go all righting, I suppose. What in fact is this humiliating way of carrying? Tosca shrieked with tearful eyes, with his armpit pinched by Beatrice whom he was carrying. Truly, just what did he regard the exalted spirit as? Tosca's conduct lacked the natural forethought towards even a lady prior to Beatrice's honor. Beatrice, a peasant after all, I suppose. Wield more delicacy, the daintiness of carrying a baby, in fact. Tosca, a baby, I understand. All right. Beatrice, no problems, I suppose. This time gently carried in his arms like a child, Beatrice pardoned Tosca's insolence. Puck threw himself down on Beatrice's chest, and the standard stance of the three departing on the journey was now contrived. Tosca, all right then, I shall run straight ahead. Please let me know if there is ever any issue. Beatrice, well, you can keep running without care, I suppose. This side will handle the earth flattening, I suppose. Tosca, understood. Well then, firm strength pouring into his legs, Tosca then broke into a sprint, Beatrice still in his arms. Her entire frame basking in the acceleration and wind, Beatrice left the palace of the witch for the first time. As the palace slowly, steadily faded away into the distance, she attempted to look back onto it in a final display of longing and valediction. Beatrice. W.A.? Tosca bolted at a velocity infinitely greater. The palace had already become invisible in a matter of seconds as the forms of the three raced down the hilly road and vaulted into the dense clouds. Within the clouds, with no longer present the white titans of ice that functioned as impeding obstacles in the paths of those with their sights set on the palace, as if verbatim flying over the bare rock that made for an unfavorable foothold, Tosca hurtled downward. Beatrice sensed no room for the assistance of magic in his unwavering momentum and speed. Truly, momentum akin to a gale. Tosca, no hindrances when returning. Seems like that was true. Beatrice. Ababa, Yubababa, Tosca. If this is how things are, then it looks like we'll be able to descend the mountain in half a day. We'll make it, I'll make it, Remina. Tosca, exhilarated, shan't notice the grueling condition Beatrice was in within his arms. On Beatrice's chest, Puck caressed his whiskers whilst pronouncing an ah, being rocked similar to her. Puck, I did think it was weird since he managed to climb up the mountain, but this kid also wasn't normal after all, huh? So he whispered, his expression utterly drained. Blight Dragon was nothing but a convenient name for dragons harboring enmity toward humans. Identical to how the spirits that yielded harm onto others were labeled as blight spirits. However, unlike spirits who for the most part did not leave their birthplaces, dragons sought to expand their turf by their own accord. This resulted in the birth of their conflict with people who originally lived there, subsequently starting to be designated as blight dragons. Beatrice. In other words, dragons being regarded as blight dragons is solely a matter of humans' point of view, in fact. Tosca. I see, then, the dragon who showed up on a mountain close to the village is also. Beatrice. It means it is one who literally spread its wings wide in order to expand its turf, I suppose. Puck, in these times even the dragons are all worked up due to their population having risen too much. They're likely troubled themselves, seeing the places they could use as dwellings become smaller and smaller. The time was one of total darkness. Beatrice elucidated about dragons whilst hewing the campfire. Half a day since their departure from the palace of the witch, Tosca's swordsmanship had exemplarily exited the montane forest, and they had successfully escaped the mountain as well as the forest of the witch. Nothing existed for Beatrice to draw a comparison with, but by Puck's word his accomplishment was akin to monstrous. Tosca, monstrous you say, that is an overpraisal. Puck caressed his whiskers as Tosca presented a humble response to the evaluation. What his round, black eyes glanced at was not the modest Tosca, but his background. Behind Tosca, lying on the ground, was a titanic, ferocious-looking lion. Black fur similar to wires, endowed with sharp fangs and claws, the quadruped possessed brutishness kindred with its fiendish appearance, but its eyes had already lost their light, the thread of its life severed. And the one to inexorably bring down this titanic brute was nobody but Tosca. Puck, I guess it's a Giltilo, not very intelligent, but their might speaks for itself, and you tidied it up so easily. You know, are you sure you don't hunt mere dragons and stuff, even without us being there? Tosca, please stop, Puck-sama. You'll know once you see any actual dragons there, not like this stupid dog. For my body to tremble non-stop during a confrontation has happened for the first time ever since with Big Brother. Swiveling his sword with an accustomed way of wielding, Tosca dissected the titanic brute he had brought down. Peeling its skin, chopping the spouting organs and blood into casual sizes, he held it on the bonfire concocted on thin woods. Beatrice, will other animals not gather due to the scent of grilling meat, in fact? Tosca, please be at ease. This guy surely has the white horn on its forehead. Other animals don't come close to animals with this horn. It also serves as an animal repel if you carry its blood. Beatrice, you seem familiar with this, I suppose. Beatrice sighed as she gazed at his cooking, upon Tosca's display of practical knowledge. Though in truth, Beatrice's plan had been to flaunt her ability and make Tosca sing her praises like, as expected of the daughter of the witch Sama. By the time of having reached up to this point, Beatrice, Betty's plan failed because you're a monster, in fact. Tosca, now you too, Beatrice Sama. Believe me, I am no monster. I can just move my body a very teensy bit more than other people. I do not compare with a dragon. A bitter grin, Tosca vanished his smile and fixed his pupils onto the flame. His eyes conveyed a certain longing that he truly should have been a monster. Had Tosca been a monster that could prey even upon a dragon, then he could have protected his childhood friend without having to depend on anyone. Tosca, no matter of how many of these stupid dogs I hunt, it is nothing worth taking pride in. Puck, that itself makes it a pitiable show for this child who got hunted. Well, it said they don't have anything in their minds aside from attacking humans, so I guess it's only fair. Seems these types of animals are called witch beasts, yeah. Beatrice, witch beasts like blight dragons, they're not called blight brutes or something, I suppose. Puck, well, it is pretty hard to pronounce. Blight brute, like beetroot. Blight brute. Puck blew a breath onto the grilling meat of the witch beast whilst uttering. That instant, the cleaved fat begot an aromatic scent before Tosca's belly gave rise to a large grumble. Tosca, frankly, their meat doesn't taste good at all. Puck, I see. Tosca, because of bad stuff being stockpiled in their bodies or something, the village headman had said. Can't be called anything extravagant either. I'll eat, though. Articulating so, Tosca proceeded to pick up a skewer and heartily dug in. His expression then observably clouded. With a disconsolate look on his face, he put down the skewer. And Tosca, Beatrice Sama, would you like one as well? Beatrice, why did you think Betty would accept it after seeing your frown just now, in fact? Tosca, no, I just thought there should be more casualties. Beatrice, just where did you drop your respect for Betty, I suppose? Beatrice nailed her rage onto Tosca, who offered her another skewer. A half-joke, Tosca obediently drew back the skewer as well. Puck, then guess I'll take it in Betty's stead. Chomp. Beatrice, Bubby. Puck, gobble, 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 it's disgusting, one more. Tosca. One more, you say? Managing to eat it alone is a feat, declared Puck with a frown, having snatched the skewer from Tosca's hand and munched the meat. Considering how small his bites were, fully eating one skewer worth of grilled meat alone was an immense task for Puck. Laughing at Puck's conduct, Tosca gorged on whatever remained of the first skewer. Giltilo's body was large, plenty of edible portions were still left. A number of skewers were being grilled on the flame, and Beatrice's gaze intermittently glanced toward them. She was a spirit, so it was improbable for her to become hungry. It was improbable, and yet, Puck, eating a witch beast is also a good way to cover for the knowledge you lack, Betty. Beatrice. Betty was thinking the same, in fact. No doubt even Mother would not have experienced eating a witch beast, I suppose. It is an opportunity to be useful to Mother, in fact. Even the studious Echidna surely mustn't have ensnared herself in this order of bizarre eating. Her sense of purpose of being useful to her mother, amalgamated with the inquisitiveness for the unknown before her eyes, Beatrice nervously took one of the grilling skewers in her hand, and with Tosca and Puck's watchful eye over her, took one bite of earnest, heartfelt desire. Beatrice. It's disgusting, I suppose. The instant she took a bite, she felt the noxiousness characteristic of carnivores fill her mouth. Furthermore, the meat itself was rigid beyond chewing, and the oozing flesh fluids upon each crunch were bitter like mud. Truly, flavor akin to chewing sand. Beatrice. Taste of hell, in fact. Shouldn't have eaten it, I suppose. Puck. On top of that, this thing's super filled with bad mana, so it's poison for us. What the village headman from Tosca's place said was correct. Beatrice. You cough. Cough, cough, in fact. Beatrice spat out what she once had in her mouth in tremendous fluster. Let her be termed as ill-mannered, but she did not possess the courage to swallow poison. And even if she did, that would amount to nothing but foolhardiness. Beside her, Puck also spat out the flesh into the flame with a cough. Puck. That's how it is, so I don't really recommend it to you either, Tosca. Even if you're not a spirit, bad content may start accumulating if you eat too much. Tosca. Is that so? But I killed it so. Puck. Must eat the life you've taken, that type of thinking, eh? I think that itself is praiseworthy, but don't you get into pretty rough spots if you apply that to everything? You seem like you could even eat some venomous insects. Tosca. Even I would prefer not to. Though an argument quite extreme, it seemed to have sufficient effect on Tosca. Informed of the possibility that his body may get eaten into from within, even Tosca lowered the skewer in his grip. However, his eyes, yet remorseful, were contemplating the witch beast meat cooling down. Beatrice. Why are you fussing over that piece of meat, I suppose? To think you would get that hungry, humans need to put some limits on their inexpediency, in fact. Tosca. It's not that I'm hungry. It's just that Big Brother had once earlier said that I'd get stronger if I ate strong creatures, so just out of habit. Manifesting a bitter smile, a sigh leaked from Tosca as he released the grilled meat into the flames. Beatrice felt a queer sensation jab her chest, beholding Tosca's expression. The expression of powerfully yearning for something, very much resembling that of pursuit for an unattainable wish. Puck. Big Brother, you say, you have an elder brother. That reminds me, you did say you were the second son, yeah. Tosca. Yes, I have an elder brother who is slightly older than me, though he is so strong you wouldn't believe he belongs to this world. Beatrice. Well, if that isn't another overstatement, I suppose. If he is so strong, then you should have left the blight dragon extermination up to your so-called big brother, in fact. Tosca. Big Brother has gone out of the village, so. His words were not the echo of a younger brother lamenting the absence of his dependable elder brother. Something far more convoluted, like the mud named a long span of time having sedimented in a water well. All one could do in order to draw the water therein was to remove the mud aside and pray for the fortune of the water well having not dried up. Beatrice. But Betty wants none of that dismal nonsense, I suppose. Tosca. Beatrice Sama. Beatrice, don't be irresolute, in fact, human. No matter how much you lose heart, you cannot become your siblings, I suppose. That is a matter of course, in fact. Pruning away the ashes on her footwear, Beatrice looked downward towards the mute Tosca. Hands on her hips, as though launching a kick into the melancholic youth's back. Beatrice. But still, you will save the village, I suppose. Tosca. Ah, Beatrice. You didn't give up, searched for what you could do, and aimed for the palace. Though Mother is absent, Betty and Bubby have mobilized your wish, in fact. No miracles befell upon those who undertook no action. No rains blessed upon those who simply looked towards the heavens. In a world where all simply withered unless one kept moving forward, the will to advance was utmost sacred. By the point of this declaration, Beatrice noticed her own heated temper. Tosca's gaze at her now rapidly altered into a source of embarrassment. Beatrice. At any rate, that's how it is, in fact. Must wake up early tomorrow as well, so sleep right away, I suppose. You'll have to run while carrying Betty in your arms tomorrow as well. In fact, Beatrice swiftly articulated whilst concealing her embarrassment, cheeks tinged red. She subsequently lied on the ground, blanketed by leaf litter, in the rear of the fallen tree being used as substitute for seating. She was not reluctant to lie on the ground either, for the impurities on her dress were erased each time she shifted positions. Though she was anticipating the disgrace, saturating her face, red to rob her of her sleep, Beatrice. Her insecurity needless, mind and body exhausted by her first travel to afar, Beatrice's consciousness reaped the allurement of deep sleep. Beginning to hear her quiet breaths of sleep within a matter of seconds, Tosca exchanged a glance with Puck. Puck, looks like she was tired after all. As you saw, she'd been in pretty high spirits. Tosca, looks to be so, since it was also apparently the first time she left her house, to think she would devote such efforts for my sake when we've just met. An intent gaze at the wavering bonfire, Tosca put one hand on another and closed his eyes. All kinds of intricate emotions pirouetted within the depths of his chest. Gratitude towards Beatrice and Puck, longing for the childhood friend he had left behind, love and despise for his elder brother absent from the village during such crucial times, apprehension whether the choice he made was the correct one or not, illimitable and unceasing. All of them, thorns incessantly tormenting Tosca since he had reached the palace of the witch, and since they had departed. However, Tosca, I will save the village. Puck, hey, Betty said so, yeah. I also think it's correct. It was hasty and careless to rely on the witch for the blight dragon extermination, but it was right that you abided by your intuition. Tosca, is that supposed to be a compliment? Puck, of course. Puck nodded, though the spirit's words were every so often mingled with an unknown language. Though his own illiteracy was distressing, had he truly yet chosen the best out of the attainable options? Puck, that is, something Betty and you will prove going forward, isn't it? Astonished by the words as though his innermost heart had been read, Tosca then beamed a wry smile, putting the lovely young girl over there aside. He could not possibly rival the easygoing, floating kitten over here. That admission in his mind, Tosca picked up one of the skewers that had been grilled to burns. Rather than crisp, the meat had about halfway turned into ash, though the flavor of the raw ingredient may now have vanished instead. Matters will remain busy tomorrow onwards as well. Regardless, however meagerly, he must fill his stomach however much possible, subsequently biting into the burnt meat. Tosca, I guess witch beasts aren't stuff to be eaten after all. Grumbling a quibble, Tosca chewed the meat stuck onto the bones until the very end. Next day onwards resumed the journey of the three, lasting for shorter than 10 days. Beatrice, neither tailwinds nor earth flattening are needed for you. To be honest, you're disgusting, I suppose. Tosca, isn't disgusting going a bit too far? Tosca hurtled, Beatrice up in his arms, at a velocity enough to receive the reward of such aspersion. His sprint was so excessively swift that to a bystander Tosca's legs would appear as invisible, and any witch beasts or stray dogs that attempted to pounce and halt him were all deserted behind, their opportunity galloping past them. Puck, not disgusting, but it is uncanny. Could it be that everyone in Tosca's village is a monster like you? Tosca, Old Man, Mum, Ramina, and the others are all normal. No, I'm telling you I'm normal as well. Beatrice. Rattles of denial coming from a guy who himself is aware, in fact. Quite loose-lipped, I suppose. Tosca, when I'm eating nothing but witch beasts, you too have a grim look in your eyes at the time of campfire, so I tried catching fish in the river today. A peculiar fish washed by the riverside floundered. as Tosca looked at the two whilst basking in the splashes of water. Beatrice and Puck, identically soaked due to the waves evoked by the peculiar fish, remarked about the gargantuan peculiar fish of a length that all three of them could be lined side by side, and its tail fin would still remain revealed. Puck, for something that was hunted to be eaten, it's way too big. Wonder if he doesn't know how to hold back. Beatrice, to begin with, the repulsiveness of its appearance is identical to that of a witch beast, in fact. Despite being a human, does he not know that not just flavor but appearance is also important for meals, I suppose? Tosca, I can hear you, the two of you. Puck, who would have thought that fish was the lord of the fishes in the river feared in the nearby village? Pretty big coincidence. Beatrice, not a quantity that could have been disposed of, so it was correct to hand it over to the village, in fact. By having brought down the lord of the nuisance fishes and handing it over, they had been amiably welcomed by the residents of the village. Because those peculiar fishes had become an obstruction in fishing, they had seemingly verged on drying up, allegedly. They were badgered to sojourn in the village and partake in the banquet to be conducted, but Tosca, I also must save my village after all. Puck, commendable, commendable. But the one you want to save is more so your childhood friend than the village, yeah. Beatrice, that village headman implored to give his daughter to you, I suppose. What a waste, in fact. Tosca, no matter what you say, Romina is the only one for me. Their journey had been a smooth one, but on occasion perilous circumstances paid a call to them. Melded with dusk, the claws of a titanic brute ambushing them from the shadows, Tosca skillfully warded them off with the sword he wielded, and the rebounding blade beautifully bisected its beefy throat. Sable blood spouted, the entire body of the red-haired youth bathed in it with no shift in expression. Repugnance, shirking, were luxurious albeit more so futile and needless sentiments in the midst of battle. Letting those not perturb his mind, Tosca braced his paltry sword forward to the next, free from neglect. Kiryuashia? A ferocious, truculent roar echoed. Jolting the parched night of the wasteland was a witch beast assimilating shadows. The witch beast that had assailed the troop on the first night as well, members of the Giltilo species. That too, a horde of them. Perhaps due to negligence of having become accustomed to the journey, they seemed to have inadvertently entered the hunting ground of the horde. Though Tosca too had acted tough and contrasted the opponent with dragons as nothing but animals. Tosca, but if they're large in numbers, then it's definitely rough. Chased by the opposition against the impertinent continued linkage of witch beasts, Tosca too felt his composure whittle. Increase of wounds caused by the grazing claws and fangs, the scent of his flowing blood roused the Giltilo. Beatrice and Puck watched over Tosca's labors from afar. They had not erased their presences or concealed themselves. The Giltilo had simply put the young girl and kitten for later, and prioritized opposing the menace before their eyes, Tosca. Conceit conveying that a small, frail creature could be turned into a dish later on as well. Puck, to be neglecting us, guess they really aren't very intelligent after all. Regardless, Tosca is putting up a pretty good fight over there. So Betty, what do we do? Beatrice. Betty will. Puck, I see. Okay, got it. Snuggling under Beatrice's hair, Puck proceeded to emerge following her brief reply. Puck's tiny frame then headed above the battleground of whirling blood. By that point, the vigilance of the witch beasts, who had made light of the spirits as trifle articles, turned toward him. They brandished their claws overhead towards Puck, who was easily within their grasp upon a single leapy Puck. Such casual mistakes, unfortunately, aren't going to get you any gold stars. The following instant, innumerable stumps of ice stitched the horde of Giltilo to the ground. The witch beasts simultaneously bellowed, their limbs and torsos lunged, having been verbatim shot through by the glaciating impact. However, the solatium for erring the enemy's war potential was a heavy one. Before long, ice spread from the mouth of the wounds birthed by the icicles, congealing even the throats relinquishing their death wails as the witch beasts transmuted into ice. With this, concluded the battle of tonight as well. Tosca. Puck-sama. Puck, no need to thank me. I've been having it pretty easy up until now, after all. Tosca, no, if you're this strong then please provide assistance more quickly. The injured Tosca gave a wry smile to Puck, blood cascading from his cheeks and forehead. His correct articulation made Puck raise his eyebrows with a whoops, whistling away in an attempt to varnish the topic over. The frosty sculptures of ice afterwards shattered, destroying the witch beasts down to their finest. Puck, now then, coming to Tosca's wounds, Beatrice. Aunt Betty will heal them, I suppose. This is nothing, in fact. Beatrice secured the duty for herself before Puck commenced his treatment. She zoomed over, hand aloft, and a pale light started healing the wounds Tosca bore. The mild sensation briskly and gently closed up the wounds. Tosca sighed in relief as well. And once all of his wounds were closed, he briskly stretched his back. Tosca, all right, the pain's all gone too. Thanks, Beatrice Sama. Beatrice, your gratitude vaguely seems to lack respect for Betty, I suppose. Her expression austere, Beatrice averted her eyes away from Tosca and murmured. Beside her, Puck groaned a with a troubled expression whilst viewing the shattered ice sculptures of the witch beasts. Puck, feels way RD. Self-assertive kids like these don't often flock together with others. Tosca, on top of that, it is strange that we encountered them over here. It's normal for people to come and go by this path in this area. Even if they're witch beasts, they never expanded their turfs or anything. Yet. Beatrice, then the answer is simple, in fact. They were driven out of their original dwelling and were in the midst of escaping, I suppose. Beatrice's theory gave rise to a staggered expression on Tosca. Seeming to have reached an identical conclusion as Beatrice, Puck nodded with a yeah whilst caressing his whiskers. Puck, if the promised night of the full moon is the limit of the dragon's hunger, then it must be starting to get into a bad mood now. That may have agitated the atmosphere, which is why the witch beasts are also running away. Tosca, it's about time, isn't it? Puck, devoid of nervousness, contrary to him was Tosca, taut with pressing emotions, imposing on herself as much nervousness. Beatrice, too, ascertained what lay ahead of the highway of night. Exactly 9 days since they had departed from the palace, the faintly waned moon of the night sky would surely fail to purely round, spherical full moon void of any impurities tomorrow. Beatrice somehow made it in time, in fact. The promised night of the full moon, I suppose. Beatrice muttered. Puck and Tosca consented whilst maintaining silence. The journey, Beatrice's first albeit a short one, its end was imminent before their eyes.